Hello, hello. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my new talk show, which is still nameless. Still thinking of a name, but before we get into that, let me welcome our special guest today. I'm joined by Rebecca Stone, aka Forestminish. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me on the very first episode. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's like so exciting that I forgot a name. I didn't really forget the name. I was telling Rebecca a little bit before we started that I've been kind of like racking my brain for about a week trying to think of this title because as we got closer to doing this, I was like, I actually need a name of the show, and I'm not calling it Friend Code. And just real quick, nice little anecdote. At the beginning of Easy Allies, I had to come up with a show to replace Pop Fiction that was called Game Sleuth. And I don't know if I've ever told a story, and I'll keep it very brief about coming up with a name. It took a back and forth with me and a friend who helped me with the first episode. Um, it took me about like 3 or 4 weeks just to come up with a name.
Oh,
So I'm really maybe bad with coming up with names. And it was like,
names are hard.
yeah, we were like just bouncing things off of each other on the phone. Like I'd like step out of my other job. I was working at Funimation at the time. I'd take like a break, walk into like the break area and call them up. I'm like, okay, let's think of more ideas and stuff. And like we just like kept going down this like rabbit hole of stuff. And finally, I was like, wait a second, aren't like detectives like also known as like sleuths and like like we were like because we kept saying like game detective, all this stuff, and like they were all taken or they're too weird, and like
Yeah.
we came up with that, and I don't know why I liked it at the time. Anyway, I might just need someone to
I
bounce
told
off
you,
ideas.
once you think of it, you'll know.
Yeah, I will say this because it's probably is not going to be the name, but I told Rebecca that I didn't say this part. I was literally about to fall asleep last night, and I wrote myself a message in Slack like, "Don't forget this, and it's probably bad, but just remember this in case." And I was like, maybe I could just call it like GCD, like based on global cooldown, but it stands for like game chat with Damiani. And I was like, I don't know, like, like, and the more I thought about it, I was like, that, like, I remember that feeling I had when we thought of Game Sleuth, the title. I was like, that felt right. I'm like, that didn't really feel quite right. Anyway, that's enough about me and coming up with a show idea. Welcome to the show. Today's topic, it's a little bit old, I will admit. It was about 3 weeks ago. It was right after the Game Awards, if you can remember the Game Awards last year. It's been a while, huh? It was Eiji Aonuma being interviewed by IGN. They talked about Tears of the Kingdom. A lot of topics about Tears of the Kingdom, but the subject of older Zelda games came up. And this made a lot of headlines. And I felt bad because I didn't really get to participate in the discussion for this. So Rebecca is very nice to indulge me here and letting me have a chance for that. We are not joined by guest AJ Aonuma on the bottom here. This is normally where I would put either B-roll or bring up like the interview on there. I was testing some stuff. I wasn't very confident it was going to work smoothly. So I'm still going to refine that a little bit. But that bottom area, if we decide to keep that, that will be where stuff like this will pop up in the future.
You mean Onuma isn't joining us? You told me he was going to be here.
Yeah, like he sent me like the Discord ID, but it didn't work. You know, I guess like
Darn.
the Nintendo people were just like, just get this guy out of here. He like asked us
Too
all these
bad, too
timeline
bad.
questions back in the day. We don't want to. This guy, no, I don't think I've ever said this to anybody, but before like an E3, there was a possible interview op that Nintendo was asking us about. It was either at Game Trailers or before I worked at Game Trailers. And Rebecca, they asked me to send like, we want you to send the questions in advance so that we could like see if like this interview will work with us. I sent them the most detailed timeline questions about like very
Oh
like
my god.
like very like deep nerd questions. And I look back and I'm like, that was so bad to do that. And they literally replied back a day later, like, we don't think this is going to be a good fit for this.
No.
Yep. They were just like, yeah, this might not be the best opportunity
Oh my
for
gosh.
that. And I was like, oh, but I was like so excited. This had to be before game shows. I must have been
Yeah.
like much
Wow.
younger. And I was just like so excited. Like they're listening to me. And like, they're like, no. I feel like I've only twice been able to ask something like that. Once to build Trinan at San Diego Comic-Con, like probably a decade ago. And
He's awesome.
he's a very cool guy. And it was pretty much, he was like just kind of giggling when he knew it. Because I was like, I have to ask this. I know you can't give me the answer, but it's cool. And then Takashi Tezuka at E3, I was interviewing for a different game that he was launching at the time. And then I asked him about like, oh, I know you are technically co-creator of Zelda. Like I was like, you don't kind of get the proper credit that you're co-creator on Zelda with Miyamoto. Like it's not just Miyamoto's joint. And I was like, one thing I had to ask is like when you're designing that original game, like what were you thinking about in terms of story? And did you really have any kind of like grand concept? And he was like, no. We were just like, we had no idea. We were just making it. Everyone was like doing a bit of everything. And I was like, there you go. Like,
It's funny how like the fans will dive into the deepest theories, and then the developers are often just like, "Oh no, we just thought it was cool."
yeah, exactly. It was just like because there were just some fans back then that just, I mean, I was guilty of this. That thought, oh yeah, they had an idea of some kind at the beginning, and it's like very naive. Like once I think more the more you work in this industry, and if you're fortunate enough to get access to developers like this, you start to see behind the curtain a little bit. It's like they're just like they're just people. They're not these
Mhm.
like. I mean, you can call them icons, but like they really are just people. They make mistakes. They think like normal people. Like they're not like superhuman or anything like that. I mean, we sometimes think they're superhuman because of like the efforts they do and how many hours they put in. But yeah, it's a little sobering to see that, but also it makes you. I think it's a better headspace to be in. And that's something for me that's been like kind of like my journey with the series is that I just came to accept like man, like you're just have unrealistic expectations with these developers. Like cut them some slack a little bit. It's
Mhm.
sometimes you need to like call them out, but like sometimes that the timeline story discussion got a little heated, a little vicious in my opinion. But
You
that's
could say that.
yeah.
I
I
think that's
mean,
a nice way to put it. Heated.
Zelda fans. I'm thankful. Like for the past like since I made like a Zelda timeline video game trailers like over a decade ago. Like a year or two after that, I think especially once we got into the Breath of the Wild cycle and they kind of acknowledge it's like a new start pretty much. I was like, yeah, I'm kind of like checked out on hardcore timeline story stuff. I'm just gonna enjoy what they put in front of me and like kind of just like faded from that scene. So I like have no idea what anyone talks about
Yeah.
anymore. I don't like have my finger on the pulse for that whatsoever.
I never took too much stock in the timeline stuff. Like, I think it's cool to have that framework of it, but I try to think of it more as like, it's the legend of Zelda. It's gonna change. It's gonna, mold over time. It's not something that Nintendo has said they don't even want it really set in stone.
Yep.
So just take it for what it is.
Yeah, that's a good place. That's a good mentality to have. And you're right. They did come out and say when they were asked about like Tears of the Kingdom's timeline places, like, yeah,
We
we
don't
don't
know.
they don't like developing like the story and timeline placement. Like they don't think about that up front. They want to make a good game first, and then
Yeah.
they fill in the story stuff. And I obviously understand why it's disappointing. I would say this isn't the topic of this episode, but Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's like their connective tissue. Like they're obviously it's there, but maybe not as like strong as some people wanted. Like that's a different
Mhm.
story. But like the broader strokes, like trying to connect all the games, all that, very complicated, very messy business that maybe it's best to just cut ties. And I like what they've done with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and kind of moved on. But speaking of Zelda fans and, their long held attachments to the past, it's kind of the subject of this episode. We have an interview from IGN with AJ Aonuma. And one of the questions they asked, I'm going to say it now so that we have the actual quote here instead of paraphrasing, although I am cutting off. The actual question is it's interesting to hear you say that because that's the beginning. They were talking about something else related to like past games. So the real question begins with one of the discussions that I've seen among Zelda fans is, gosh, I miss the traditional linear Zelda of the past. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about that given the direction of the series towards a very freeform, open ended kind of design? So that was IGN's question to AJ Aonuma. Aonuma replied, well, I do think we as a people have a tendency to want the thing that we don't currently have. And there's a bit of a grass is greener mentality. But I also think that with the freedom players have in the more recent games in the series, there is still a set path. It just happens to be the path that they choose. So I think that is one thing I kind of like to remind myself about the current games that we're making. So that's the first part of it about, yeah, the grass is always greener, but there's still like a set path. There's a second part of this answer that he says, but also it's interesting when I hear people say those things because I'm wondering, why do you want to go back to a type of game where you're more limited or more restricted in the types of things or ways you can play? But I do understand the desire that we have for nostalgia, so I can also understand it from that aspect. That's kind of where I want to start with, is that the last part. The part about the set path and the grass is always greener. That's obviously something I want to get into. But why do you want to go back to a type of game where you're more limited or more restricted in the types of things or ways you can play? Why do you think it is that players, I mean, do you have that desire, Rebecca, at all to go back to like an older style of Zelda? Do you want to see a new older style of Zelda, or are you kind of good with what they have?
I am definitely one of those people that does want the Zelda formula to go back to what it was, but not necessarily like just that. Like I do love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and the open world. Like I love that for what it is, but I also miss a lot of the aspects of the linear Zelda games. And I think it's funny, he's so spot on with the grass is always greener mentality. People want what they don't have, because the entire conversation when Skyward Sword came out before Breath of the Wild was even conceived was, this is so linear. We just want something with more freedom. Why are we so limited in this game? With we can only go to three places and we have to go in an order and we have to go back, three different times. And everybody was really clamoring for more of an open type of game, and that's how Breath of the Wild really was created, from people complaining about Skyward Sword. And so they went like in this full in that direction. And now that we've had two games with that style, we hear more people saying, oh, like actually this open world was fun, but like I kind of miss how it was before. So I think that was kind of inevitable. He's so right with how people have that mentality. But and I don't know if this is still an unpopular opinion, but I think for a while it was an unpopular opinion that uh, I like linear games. To me, games don't have to be about the choices and creating your own journey. I think that is a lot of fun, but a lot of what I like about older Zelda games is the figuring out what you're supposed to do and following like what you're supposed to be doing. It's like that puzzle solving,
Hmm.
going in the journey that's already set. Like I'm on Link's journey. I'm not necessarily on my own journey. And not that's not to diss the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom formula. I do love a lot of things about that, but the go to these dungeons in this order thing was I liked it. I liked it.
Hmm. Very good points there, and I think it was well said. Um, I want to touch upon you when you talked about Skyward Sword, and giving kind of like the history background leading to Breath of the Wild. Um, and you talked about like linear can be good. So like I'm kind of trying to conflate those two here, saying like there was a time period in like I think like just game development where linear was seen as like a dirty word. I would say
Hmm.
probably around the time Final Fantasy 13 came out, and in that wake of that, people were like really down on linear games. But Zelda has shown that like the older ones that have been a little bit more linear are some of the most beloved ones. Like Link's Awakening is one that comes up because it only got a re-release in 2019 on Switch, and
Hmm.
that is a very, very linear game. There's very few points where you have a little bit of choice in what you can really do. And it is what you said about like figuring out. A lot of people found some of the dungeon design to be a little bit more like confusing, and the way you progress a little bit different than you do in Breath of the Wild and more modern games. So it's not just like linear; it's also like the puzzle and progression design. So my question to you is linear design, with Skyward Sword specifically, do you think maybe it was like just it wasn't that it was linear was the problem. It was like what you were doing along the way. Because like just like Final Fantasy 13, it's very linear, but like you're just running down corridors and it's kind of like boring along the way. Whereas like something like Final Fantasy 7 Remake is still pretty linear, but they kind of padded it with like set dressing converse. They made it feel like you're not just walking along a path. Yeah, do you think it was maybe this like Skyward Sword fault, like its fault was maybe in that, and that maybe if they'd done something like a different older Zelda game, it might have gone over a little bit better? Like,
Yeah,
like, yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
I don't think the linearity is necessarily Skyward Sword's problem. And you're right
yeah,
that like the word linear, for that's why I said I don't know if this is still an unpopular opinion, because for a time it really was. But so many people I hear say like Twilight Princess is their favorite Zelda game. that's linear. You can't do, the dungeons in any order you want. You can't, you're very limited at first of like what you can explore. You can't just like go places until they're open. And nobody criticizes that for being linear. And there's so many other games that, are so beloved, like you said, Final Fantasy 13. Like nobody criticizes stuff like The Last of Us for being linear. That's like the most linear game you can think of, but it has stellar gameplay, it has a stellar story, and I know that Zelda has, really been missing on that stellar story part, but I think the gameplay is what drives a lot of, what makes those linear games good. Figuring out the puzzles and the dungeon designs, and and I think that both could live together, the linear games and the open world models. I don't know if it's too early to jump into that.
That is one of the questions I had. The why can't we have both meme gif? But real quick before we get into that, one last follow up on the story driven. I know there are people who maybe don't want more story in Zelda, but there are definitely a lot of people. Like obviously we talked about tiling stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about like feeling like a rich, rewarding story in game as kind of like something to help drive you, to give you motivation. And a lot of people point to, well, Zelda's doing new things. Breath of the Wild, it's doing a new type of Zelda hasn't done this before. Tears of the Kingdom is like its second go around, so you kind of like expected them to improve it. And I'll be honest, like just on that point, I don't think they greatly improved the narrative storytelling mechanisms in that game. It felt very much like derivative and not really trying to do anything different. And for those who criticize, well, like it's open world, what do you expect? You saying Last of Us, which is not open world, but another very revered game. It got me thinking because I'm thinking of Michael Huber, and Huber loves Last of Us, but he also loves Red Dead Redemption. And Red Dead Redemption 2 is yes. And I've talked about this with Gabby at Easy Allies and Huber about, well, why can't they look at something like Red Dead Redemption 2 and see how you do storytelling in an open world game where the player has a little bit more choice, but there are critical points you have to hit. So yeah, like, do you think Zelda could have something like that maybe, or is that something you'd want from a Zelda game in the future?
Yeah, I would definitely want it. I think that story, I think you said this earlier, story has kind of always taken a back seat to Zelda games. Like they come up with the world and the gameplay design, and the story kind of falls in after that. And you're right, I think that they haven't really figured out the best way to tell a good story in an open world game, just because we saw in both of these games how the story has been told very indirectly. Like it's mostly in the form of memories, or like, those past cutscenes. We got those snippets of our memories in Breath of the Wild, and it was just, a cutscene, and you were most likely finding them in the wrong order. I know in Tears of the Kingdom, like unless you went and purposely sought out like the right order to find the Zelda memories in, you were probably finding them in the wrong order. So, it can be difficult that there could be a really good story here, but it's being told in the wrong order and you have to figure it out. And maybe you're seeing one cutscene and then you do, 3 dungeons and a million side quests and shrines, and like you're not getting the next part of that story, which is actually the first part of the story, until like 30 hours later. And that's, you're right, not a great way to tell what could potentially be, a very good narrative.
Yeah. At this point, maybe they should bring Miyamoto back, since he's talking about like reading movie scripts and, making Mario movies and, maybe like working on Zelda movies. He used to be the one who wasn't known for storytelling in game. In fact, there's some like old anecdotes about him chasing out story elements in like even older Zelda games where developers had to hide stuff in side quests. That's why like Ocarina of Time's like a good one as well. But maybe things have come full circle. Now they need to bring Miyamoto back into the fold and be like, hey, you've got all this like storytelling experience now from like Hollywood and all these films. Like maybe you could lend some expertise. I'm just joking, but yeah, I would like to see them tackle that. I'm with you. It doesn't have to be like Last of Us or even like Red Dead caliber. I just want something that's not like the memories and like piecing together like that. I want something a little bit more crafted, and like you do have to hit certain spots. Would be a nice balance, like a compromise. I'm just looking for a little bit of a compromise here. But you did say, to get to the point earlier where you thought we were going to go to, the why can't we have both? Why can't we have linear? Why can't we have Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom? And yeah, is that so? That's something you want to see. Is that something you think they should be doing? Making taking longer time on the mainline Zeldas like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and its inevitable sequel. And could maybe another team be working on more older style of Zelda games? That's something you'd like to see, and you think they should be doing?
I'm a little biased because just because I grew up with the linear Zeldas and the more traditional formula. Of course, I want to see that. I think that Nintendo, especially for the Zelda franchise, they're kind of following also what's popular. I think a lot of what Breath of the Wild was born out of was because open world games really started taking off right before that time, and so they're like, "Oh, I think we should probably like mold it in that direction as well." I don't know that open world games are going to be popular forever. Are we starting to phase out of that? They might want to go, in a different direction anyway because of what's just the current trend in gaming. But as somebody who really loves them, I would, of course, I would love to see that. But I also think, they are looking at sales numbers and taking a look at the difference between how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have sold compared to Link's Awakening and Skyward Sword on Switch. I know those are remakes, but also just historically, like Zelda games sell really well, but not nearly as much as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And is that because it's on the Switch? Is that because it's open world and it hit, an audience that never wanted to try it before? I don't know that, but they want to go where the money is, of course, and that might not be the traditional games, which is sad.
Yeah, I do think it's hard to ignore the sales numbers that both these games have done. So obviously that's why these types need to take the priority. And for whatever reason they believe it's happening, any of the ones you just said, that is why they're pursuing it. But these do take like 5, 6 years development at least. I mean, obviously, like COVID and the pandemic impacted Tears of the Kingdom's development, but still, it felt like it was going to take a long time. And that was like not completely reusing all same assets, but taking place in the same world and with the same characters. Imagine if the next one has to craft a whole brand new world with multiple layers on it. How long
Yeah.
that
Are we
might
willing
take.
to wait like 7, 8 years for the next Zelda game? Like, that's so long.
Is it doing enough numbers where it's like GTA status, where it's like once every 10 to
Right.
12 years? Is it that big yet? I don't think it's quite there yet. It's like in between. So I would argue they do need to fill it with other releases in between if they can. And that's why it would be nice to fill in those gaps with maybe newer entries that are structured more like the older games, which are maybe a little bit easier to make. I don't know. I'm not the developer, but I would imagine because they're not as open and have giant, enormous environments, it might be easier to make a new style of Ocarina of Time than it is to make a new Breath of the Wild. Obviously,
Yeah.
Nintendo might have other ideas. They might want to try something different. They might have spin offs. Who knows? But yeah, is that like, I feel like I'm not alone in that. I'd love to see another development studio at Nintendo, maybe Grezzo. They've done so many of these remasters. Could they be put on making an older style of Zelda game, like maybe every 2 to 3 years in between? So we get like a Tears of the Kingdom we just got last year. Maybe in another year or two we get new 3D traditional style Zelda, and then we get Tears of the King or sequel. Or I mean, does it even have to be
Yeah.
3D? Like, let me ask you that. Does it even have to
No,
be
yeah, I
3D?
was gonna say, like, that would be such an ideal scenario, and I have a lot of fears that they're not gonna make another top-down Zelda game, ever again,
Oof.
and
Yeah.
I don't know, that's like that would really break my heart because that's what got me into the series, and I really feel like they are so different than the 3D games, and they deserve to live alongside them. And you're right, getting other studios like Grezzo to work on stuff like that in the meantime is not impacting the development of, the big open world game that's gonna take 7 or 8 years to make. And I think they could. It wouldn't be the first time. They've of course had Grezzo working on, remakes, and I think they even developed Triforce Heroes, which I know wasn't everybody's favorite game, but they've given them the reins a few times, and in the past they have let Capcom take a stab at their top-down games.
Hmm.
And another recent quote, I think it was Onuma, was talking about, no, we don't ever have any plans to make a Zelda Dungeon Maker. And that also crushed my hopes and
Yeah.
dreams because I was like, this could be a
Oh.
great, like, in between type of game. But I think that would, going back to what you said, it would be the ideal scenario to have those types of titles. A mix of remakes, a top-down game, and like maybe a smaller budget traditional 3D game. Fill in those gaps.
Yeah, and yeah, bringing up like the remakes and remasters from Grezzo, that those are obviously something they Nintendo could rely on instead, or just said sprinkle them in. I mean, the why not have both? It's like why not have all? It's like let's have new traditional style Zeldas, new Tears of the open air Zeldas as they call them, and
Hmm.
new remasters, remakes on top. Like let's have all three. I mean, I'm ready, and maybe reconsider that. But yeah, like I mean, obviously there've been lots of rumors. Like we keep hearing about Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD being freed from Wii U and coming to Switch, ports of those. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D are still locked to 3DS, 2DS, and can't come, it would be maybe they could do something like that. And then a lot of people have been asking for the Oracle games going to get like the Link's Awakening
Hmm.
treatment, or maybe the Minish Cap get. Although the Minish Cap, I would say, at a more unique art style, so I would be a little bummed if they didn't do something a little bit more special for that. I don't know how you feel about that, given your alias namesake. If you have any special
Yeah,
feelings
that's, I
about
mean,
that.
I do. And that's another thing that breaks my heart is that I think a lot of, Nintendo and I even think about Pokemon, how they're probably never going to go back to sprite-based artwork unless they really start to embrace, the HD 2D thing that Square's got going on. I think those games are beautiful and I would
Yes.
love to see a top-down Zelda game in that kind of style. Remake Minish Cap in that style. It would be gorgeous.
Can you imagine if they contacted Square Enix and asked, "Can Team Asano handle like Minish Cap and can you
That would be a
do a 2D
dream.
HD version of it?" They're pretty
That would be
busy,
a dream.
but that would be amazing if they could do that. Other developers are starting to do that as well. But yeah, like the sprite based thing is interesting because another project that I've seen some people mention, there were like rumors about it, but I don't think anything was substantial. But like the Zelda 2 remake, side scrolling. I know it's a different type of Zelda, but names like Yacht Club Games or Way Forward were
Mm.
tossed around as like maybe they can do it since they specialize in something like that. And would it be the 2D art style, like pixel art? Would they do it like a lot of their newer entries are doing? Like maybe Dot Emu would be someone because they did the didn't they just do the Turtles Shredders
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'll double check that, but like I believe they've been doing more pixel. They did whoever did the other one I'm forgetting right now, but Shredder's Revenge, sorry, I'm just looking it up, was actually done by Dotemu. It was the publisher, so
Yeah,
Tribute
okay.
Games developed it. Sorry. But some like there are more smaller studios that are still trying to specialize in capturing that old sprite-based feel. And I think it was Double Dragon was the one Huber and I played where they did it was a little bit weirder style, but like it kind of like was trying to emulate it. So I think there might be they might be able to outsource it to someone else if they really want to do it. We had a Crypt the Necrodancer did the Zelda
Yes.
Cadence of Hyrule, which we got that. So maybe it's just another collaboration with an indie studio potentially could make. Would you like to see that?
Would love to see that, and I think Nintendo is very careful about who they give the keys to their franchises, as they should be. And Zelda is such a special one, but I think Zelda is unique compared to their other franchises in that they have so many different types of games and types of styles for their games. Like, how many other of their franchises really have that? And I think that while their main studios are working on these bigger projects that are going to take some time, I would love to see them give the keys to, these smaller studios. And you named some really good ones, like the ones who have shown that they can make a game in that style, like Way Forward, and Yacht Club, and these trusted developers that have worked with them before. And yeah, I would love that. That would be like so great.
While we're on like the little hypothetical train real quick before I get back to linear Zelda, a question to follow up that. One thing I have to ask because I always love talking about that and hearing other people's thoughts. Would you ever want what other genre would you like to see Zelda maybe like tackle? We've seen like Muso, we've seen like a bunch of different spin-offs. Is there a genre you want to see? Because my answer is RPG. Like we just had Super Mario RPG came with the re-release of that classic when that game came out, I was like, can they make Zelda RPG next? Like, I want Zelda RPG like this. I want a Zelda RPG with like Square involved, and like, I don't know what is your dream genre spinoff?
Yeah, and that's interesting because they have dipped into other genres like they did, I guess this Cadence of Hyrule, that would count as a rhythm game, right?
Mhm.
Um, but they like to do it in ways that like nobody is really, expecting. Like they did a Zelda shooter and that was Link's crossbow training. And that's not really what you think of when you think of like a shooter. So I think if they did do, like are you thinking of more like a turn-based RPG type of game
Yeah,
or
like something
something?
that
Yeah.
maybe with like action inputs, like the timed inputs, so like Link swings, like if you like maybe like hold down A at the right time, he does like the spin attack, or he does like multiple hits, like maybe Zelda's like archer and like spellcaster, or maybe there's even like a jobs. I mean, I'm not going that far down. Like maybe it could be as far as that,
Right.
but it was also like the possibility of like we get to see more characters besides just like Link and Zelda. They're participating in this
Mhm.
adventure. There's more like story. It was just something I like dreamed of and used to like jot down like ideas for what they could do.
No, I
And
think that would
yeah,
be a lot of fun and like a great way to, have some of those other characters and like classes of characters in your party, and I'm thinking maybe just because it's on my mind since it's so recent, but Mario RPG like was such a fun opportunity to make Mario into, this RPG genre, but it didn't take itself too seriously, and it allowed you to have, characters like Peach and Bowser on your team. And now I'm just kind of thinking of something like that on with Zelda and having, Zelda be on your team, maybe even have Ganondorf be on your team, fighting some other threat and just, some kind of charming, not taking itself too seriously adventure. That would be fun.
for sure. Any of that sounds like great, and would hope to see that.
Or Paper Zelda. I know there have been so many mock-ups
Yes.
of like,
Oh yeah.
as long as we're talking about RPGs, like a Paper Mario style Zelda. I've seen lots of concepts for that. That would be so
Mhm.
cool.
One thing that I'm watching chat right now, and I saw them bring it up early. I think Zorgo was the first person to bring it up like a few topics ago or questions ago. Zelda as a Metroidvania. That there's so many
Ooh, that would be
Metroidvanias
interesting.
coming out now. It is like probably one of the most popular genres. It's a genre that like people just like very much revere. And I don't know if that's something that they could apply to Zelda. Now you're saying they like to when they do these spin-offs or different genres, like they do something new. Now when you think of Metroidvania, you think of like side-scrolling pretty much and like a side-scrolling
Mhm.
action adventure. What if it was more of a top-down old school style Zelda, but more Metroidvania like that? Is that something?
So this is actually something that I have thought of so
Ooh,
much,
okay.
and I struggle with it because in a lot of ways Zelda is like Metroidvania adjacent already. Like if you think about all of the qualities that make up a Metroidvania, like all of the things that you would use to define what a Metroidvania is, A Link to the Past fits that criteria, like almost exactly. And so like I joke to my friends like A Link to the Past is my favorite Metroidvania. And of course that's not serious, but like it's just so adjacent that it could absolutely work.
Yeah, I mostly agree, and I would say like even like a link between worlds, like with the item renting and like how you can use different items to progress through different parts, and how like dungeons account for you maybe having different items to solve the puzzles. I thought I like that was one of the most promising aspects in a Zelda game I'd seen in a long time. We'll get to that in a little bit later about maybe some dungeon stuff, because there might be another statement from Eiji Aonuma in the same interview about this. But yeah, I do agree with you that I feel like Zelda has historically been a little bit adjacent to the now defined Metroidvania genre. And I was always curious if they would ever just go all in on one and take and try their hand on it. In fact, I think Skyward Sword maybe at one point was trying to do that because you're going back and forth between the zones, but because they're not
Right.
seamlessly connected, you lose that. Like I think you have to have that. You have to be able to
Definitely.
walk from point A to point B across multiple zones and then come back and not just fast travel or warp only to access those zones. So I
Right.
think that was its mistake. I do see people asking about a roguelite Zelda now. It's like, oh man. Yeah, like they could go down we can go down this rabbit hole forever about what they could do. But I want to get back real quick to linear Zelda, and if they were to make another one, we talked about like top down, all that. Like What would you like to see in a more linear Zelda? Is there something you would like to see return? Is there something you'd like to try different that's more within the typical Zelda wheelhouse from the older style of Zelda games?
Yeah, it's hard because and I keep thinking like I miss what we had type of thing. Like I miss the traditional items like the hook shot and just getting really creative with items like the Rock's Feather in those top-down games. So that's something that I would like them to go back to, but if there is a way for them to maybe integrate, more stories and like even choices, like I've been really into games lately that maybe the world or the characters or even the story changes based on the choices that you make. That's something that I think would be really fun to explore in a Zelda game, like maybe different endings based on, the order that you choose to do things, if they still want to keep it open to some extent. I think adding choices to like a linear game could fill in that like choice of freedom that people would be missing. You have to go do things in like a certain order, but maybe you have other types of choices to make along the way.
Yeah. I feel those are pretty good. And to add on to that with like the items, because you mentioned like the hook shot, I was very severely disappointed that there was no hook shot in Tears of the Kingdom.
I
But that's something I would like to see. If
know.
there's something they're just gonna do differently next time, and it's not gonna be radically different. I do think they need. I know they did the fusion. I know they would like. It's funny you say like no Zelda make dungeon maker, but yet you're letting people craft all this like these unique items and weapons and stuff and make these creations in Tears of the Kingdom. It's like you kind of are going in that direction.
People will
Like
be
yeah,
creative.
yeah. Like you're fostering this creative nature. Why aren't you doing that? More traditional weapons being brought forward into the system and allowing them to impact how you can maybe explore and traverse because we've seen what they did with the Sheikah Slate in the first one. We saw what they did here in Tears of the Kingdom. I would like to see them go further. Obviously, I personally wasn't fully satisfied by the fusion system. It was nice. It was like interesting and intriguing, but there were just moments I was like, man, I wish I had this item and just only this item. I just to me
hmm
having a hook shot and being able to like not just like link grappling to a spot, but like imagine like I don't know if you played any of like the like Arkham City game for Batman, the Rocksteady one, but when Batman can like grapple, he'll launch into the air and then like his wings will spread and he'll glide. Now imagine Link with the paraglider, like launching off like a side of like a building and
Right.
then like getting like more speed and like maybe like adding more aerial combat because now he can like grab onto enemies. There's so many possibilities I
Even
could
if
see.
it's
Yeah.
late game concept,
Yes.
like I could see them not, wanting to add the hook shot because it could be game breaking of like traversal so early in the game, but maybe adding it as like a late game type of item where after you have completed XYZ, you can get a chance to get this.
Yeah, it's just something I like to see. Maybe they'll tackle it a different way. And, Nintendo's generally pretty creative, and maybe they'll solve. I don't know if this is a problem, but like maybe they'll address this issue if they want to, and come up with a creative way. Um, but another thing, real quick, before I forget, because it's about to slip my mind. I was like, nope, come back here. The talk about like linear Zelda and versus like a more like open. Eiji Aonuma's quote about like the grass is always greener, because people don't have it. But the last part of his thing about wondering why, that specifically, why do you want to go back to a type of game where you're more limited or restricted? So, like to me, this feels like I get why he's asking. He's in good faith. He's asking this question, but to give him an answer, sometimes people prefer that style of game. Not everyone likes the new type of Zelda. They would like to go like not everyone likes as much maybe choice and freedom. I am very vocal about my notorious stance of like why I don't really like CRPGs and like very like Baldur's Gate. It's like I don't like that level of freedom and choice. Like that's too much for me. I need a
It
little bit
can be
more
very
guidance. Yes.
overwhelming.
Perfect way to put it,
I'm
Rebecca.
somebody that has decision paralysis, like, not just in video games, but, like,
Yes.
in real life too, where I have too many choices in front of me, I just, like, freeze and can't pick, and, I think a lot of what, what I loved about Zelda growing up was just figuring out what like I'm supposed to be doing, rather than making that choice for me. And I think like I've tried games like Assassin's Creed, and like I think I would love it if I didn't have that decision paralysis, where like I get into the world and it's like, okay, I have so many things I can do. What the heck should I start with first? Like, I want to start with this, but like I really could be stronger first. So let me go train. Oh, but wait, like there's, things that I could help over here. And I think that applies to Tears of the Kingdom as well. Once you get off of that Sky Island, there is a lot you can do. You can go straight for the first dungeon, you can find shrines, you can go do side quests, you can go find a town, you can just go explore. Like there's so many choices, and you're right. I think, some people just don't prefer that. They prefer, going along the path and uncovering what you're meant to be doing in the order you're meant to be doing it.
Yeah, and like I understand all the perspectives, but like I'm also a little bit the same way as I said. Like for something like the Spider-Man 2 just came out last year, and I loved it because it's more open. It's a giant New York City, a little bit more sandbox. They don't overwhelm you with too much to do at any point, like with the side activities. You mentioned like Assassin's Creed, like Ubisoft is kind of notorious for dropping all that stuff. And it's like, what? I can't even focus. There's so many like symbols on the screen. Where do I even go? Whereas I felt like Spider-Man nailed that sweet spot of there. I felt like I had enough to do on the side activities if I wanted to, but there was like a good enough nudge at all times. Like, well, you
Hmm.
should be going here, but like it wasn't too forceful. The hand was not too forceful, and that I kind of prefer more like that. And I think when Zelda was a little bit more in that direction, kind of like having that hand nudge you, and it's like the freedom is, find a secret in this area or how you traverse a dungeon. Like the dungeons were kind of like one of the bigger highlights for me. And we'll get that in a second. But yeah, I kind of like do miss that, and would kind of like prefer that as well for sure. But
Yeah, I don't know how it would translate to a Zelda game. Maybe it would be in the form of dungeons, but something that I really liked was the gameplay design of games like Mario Odyssey and Pokemon Legends Arceus, where it's pretty linear, but it has open areas like within that linearity. So like you're dropped into the first area and like you're free to do what you want in that first area. And then when you're done there, then you go to the next area and you're free
oh
to
yeah.
do what you want there. So like I don't know how that, like I said, how that translates to a Zelda
Hmm.
game,
Yeah, if only they
but
had a studio that made a series that kind of does that. I mean, it is technically an RPG series, but I don't know. Studio called Monolith Soft and maybe Xenoblade
Mhm.
Chronicles. I feel like anytime it gets, those are great examples, but because I just have so many friends who are into this series, Xenoblade. It is the prototype. Like I mean, it's the gold standard in my opinion for making a game that's not a giant sandbox open world but gives you that sense of freedom of exploration. And if you want to, you can get lost in that world for hours, but there is always, you can just go here and move on. You do not have to stay here. There is a direction to go and you can follow that path. And it's like you get out what you put in. And that's true of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but I do feel like the way the developers want you to play those games is to do that, is to get lost in those worlds. And
Mhm.
that's what they're doing. But at the same time, there's a way to like have like a compromised version that's still just as good. And to me, that's Xenoblade because like it is not a giant open world. And you have the narrative elements. Those games have really, really intense storylines and very good character
Yeah.
development. So I like we were talking about Red Dead. I should have just said like I mean, well, they're doing completely open world, but maybe that's like I'm answering my own question earlier about where does linear Zelda go, and it's like if they want to make Breath of the Wild style games, maybe they make something more like Xenoblade style Zelda games, like that
Mhm.
structure. I don't know. Maybe, maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah, and I see somebody, in chat is talking about how that's what they intended the main quest log for, and sure,
Yeah.
you can follow that main quest and do the dungeons in like, I guess there is a recommended order, I think, if I remember correctly, that you can follow. But you're right, and I haven't played Xenoblade, but I would imagine that like the one thing that Tears of the Kingdom was missing from that is like that driving narrative part of it. Like if you just follow the main quest, you're hitting all of those dungeons and pieces, but like it's clearly like you said not how they intended for you to play
Yeah,
the game.
exactly. Yeah. Like I feel like so. Let me say this real quick before I forget, because I feel like I've said this in the past, but maybe I haven't said it loud enough. Breath of the Wild and sorry, Tears of the Kingdom. I'm always going to say Breath of the Wild for some reason. Tears of the Kingdom is just harder in my mind to like say, even though it's the most recent one. It does what a lot of like the great games as a service, like MMORPGs, do. It gives you so. When you're talking about being overwhelmed, they're doing it on purpose because they're trying to cast as wide of a net to catch as many people and letting those people feel like there's enough there if they just focus on a few things. So maybe what I did in Tears of the Kingdom isn't what someone else did, but we both were completely satisfied with our experiences because they gave you so much. Just like any good MMORPG, you can't possibly do everything in those games. They're designed to never end, but like that's what they do. They give you so much to do that like you're gonna like feel satisfied. So I think that has always been the intended goal with what they're doing with these Zelda games, the new Zelda games.
And I think there is a lot of merit to that too. Like I do like that aspect of it. It's so hard to find the balance because I do love that my dad plays Zelda too. That's something that
Oh,
like
cool.
we grew up playing together. I grew up playing together with him, and obviously we don't live together anymore. But when I see him and he's playing it, and like he's able to say, "Oh, like did you see this really cool thing that I found?" And I'm like, I did not come across that in my 50 hours, of playing so far. And then, I'll be watching him do something, and I'm like, why don't you just do it this way? And he'll say, well, I had no idea you could do it that way. So the fact that it is so open with choices and casting that wide net, like you said, does bring it open to, talking about it with other people and learning and sharing what your unique experience is. Your experience is not going to be like anybody else's experience. And like I said, I think there is some merit in that, and makes that really a good aspect of it too.
Yes, that's definitely
It's a pro,
that.
a
Yeah,
pro to it.
that is definitely part of that secret sauce for those two games, and that's what they're counting on, like people sharing their experiences like that, sharing them online, all the crazy videos. How many videos do we see
You
of
just
like,
don't get that with linear games because
yeah,
like you've played it, you've seen it, you've done it. You don't need to see 14 more clips of it.
exactly. And honestly, like, yeah, but like, I get why that for me, there's a place for both. Like, it's exciting to see how many different ways you can kill Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom by like setting up crazy death traps for him that like make me think you should probably be designing the next Saw movie. But then they're like, but then there are people who like have very fond memories of like the unique crafted adventure they have in countless other games and older Zelda games. And this was the thing this was like eluding me for like the past 45 minutes or roughly 40 minutes. AJ Anuma's quote, well, he's not literally saying that the older games are worse than the newer games. They're like just different. And he doesn't like he thinks other than nostalgia, why do you want to go back and play these if we've given you something newer and better? Is like how I'm interpreting it. This is a personal thing, another anecdote, but when I asked the infamous, I found a way to drop 14 into this discussion, the nightmare question I asked Naoki Yoshida, director producer of Final Fantasy 14, about why would they never release a classic server, like when WoW was doing their classic servers, to let people go back and experience the older. He said, why would we want people to experience an inferior product? Now that's nuance there, yes. Older version of Final Fantasy 14 is way worse than the newer version, but the point is people want to experience it. If people are saying they want to do it, why are you like questioning them? Like maybe there's a demand there. Like obviously you might think it's worse. A lot of people might think it's worse, but if enough people think it's good enough and want to play it, like I like maybe it is
It
worth
might
pursuing.
objectively be worse, but
Yeah.
nostalgia is a powerful
Yeah.
drug. Like,
Yeah.
just not even people who have experienced it, as they were growing up, or, it was their first experience with it. But I know a lot of people who want to go back and see the roots of what their favorite games were. And I think there's, credibility in that as well.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. And applying it to Zelda, this is why I'm on the side of I really think they should be releasing more Zelda games and more games in the older style. I think there is a place for Ocarina to like I'm going to say up to Twilight Princess. I'm not going to include Skyward Sword because we shouldn't be
Oh
making more.
no.
I don't like Skyward Sword, so that's my personal opinion. But to be fair, but Ocarina to Skyward Sword, we'll just like put it in that window of those types of 3D, more traditional Zelda games. I think there's room to make newer ones of those, and I would like to see them. and I'm willing to pay money for them. It's like I will pay money for them, and I know there are a lot of people who pay money for them. Like I understand that you don't see why we'd want to play them if they have limited choice, but that was kind of the beauty of it. Like I love those, and while I completely respect and adore what they did in the most recent two Zelda 3D Zelda games, Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, I always I still don't think I rate either of them higher than my personal favorite Zelda games. And also to what you said earlier, Rebecca, I would like to see more top-down Zeldas or just, that go back that further. I want it all. And like I think they're
Yeah.
good. Like a
Is it
link
greedy of us to want it all? Because
no,
other franchises don't get games the way Zelda games get.
A Link Between Worlds came out 10 years ago and it was fantastic. And I was like, I know you literally built upon the Link to the Past blueprint, but like, can you just keep going? Like, why didn't you make another one of these? Why didn't you take the item rental system and like the like how you acquire items might be the freedom you're looking for because it
Mhm.
allowed you to tackle dungeons in a different way based on the items you had access. I was like, this is it. This is how you evolve the older Zelda formula. Like, you can even apply this to 3D. Like, go with this, and like they kind of didn't ever go back to that. And that's like, to me, that's like the creative concept that's still on the table, that potential that's still like untapped to me, and it has not been satisfied by Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. And that's kind of like our last topic here we didn't get into is like the really like dungeons, because items and dungeons to me are so synonymous with Zelda, like the puzzles and how you solve them in dungeons with your items. And despite what they did in Tears of the Kingdom, I still wasn't very satisfied with the dungeon design. I do have Eiji Aonuma did say like they heard when IGN asked about this. He said he heard feedback about the dungeons in Breath of the Wild, and thus that's what we got in Tears of the Kingdom. They basically looked at their past approaches, and this is what they came up with. So, did you feel like how did you feel about Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons and anything what I said like items and like the design freedom? Do you want to see more of that, or do you have like different things you want to see in future
No,
dungeons?
no, like you said, I think dungeons are a huge part of why I love the Zelda franchise. It really drives the games for me. But I was really excited in the weeks leading up to Tears of the Kingdom, hearing some of those interviews talking about how, we went back to the traditional dungeon style, and I was so hyped for that. And then I got there and it really wasn't what I thought was a traditional dungeon style. I don't know, maybe I have a different idea of what that means than what Nintendo means. I do think they were a big step up from Breath of the Wild. And I don't know if maybe that was because they seemed like a little bit more themed or elemental themed and had a unique boss. Like I think back to Breath of the Wild's dungeons
Yeah.
and they all look generally the same and all of the bosses are generally the same and I have a hard time distinguishing between them in my memory, whereas in most Zelda games I can distinctly remember what the fire temple in Twilight Princess looked like and what the forest temple in Ocarina of Time was like, and I can remember those bosses and those fights and what I had to do, and it wasn't just slashing at them 100 times.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think Tears of the Kingdom did build on that with having more uniqueness to them. I loved all of the boss fights in all of them, but it's missing that you have to go room to room, solve the puzzles, beat the enemies, find the
Yes.
key, unlock the
Thank
door,
you.
travel back, and it didn't feel like what I wanted.
This is where I think their current design philosophy runs into like a big fat brick wall because they haven't like quite solved the problem of how do you make compelling dungeons with
Yeah.
that level of freedom. And
It's
I
like they
think
forgot.
yeah. Well, in terms of like more linear objective design, that is where I think all the previous 3D Zelda dungeons and some of the 2D Zelda dungeons shine because they have that logic they have to follow. Yes, you can't go in any single room like you can like in Hyrule Castle in both in Twilight and Breath of the Wild. When you get there, you can just climb all over the place. You have the like if you have the abilities, you can go anywhere. And in a lot of the Tears of the Kingdoms dungeons, like I remember like the fire temple. It's just like I literally can just climb over half the 90% of the stuff here.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
didn't feel like I was figuring out the
yeah,
puzzle. It felt like I kept thinking like, "How can I cheese this to do it like the
ex-
easiest way possible?" And
thank
like,
you. Thank you
sure,
for
that's like
saying that.
stretching my brain and like there's some coolness in that, but like I don't know. It didn't feel as satisfying, I
Yes.
guess. Like, yeah, I have the ability to solve this the intended way, or I can build a flying machine and just jump over the wall.
Thank you so much for saying that, Rebecca. Like, not just the cheese part, but like when a game is teaching you how to play it, when Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is showing you how its rules and encouraging you, pushing you to play it the way it's intending you to play, being creative to solve all this stuff, like use your mind, and then you use it in the dungeon. It's like you can't criticize the player for like the game was telling you to do this. I'm supposed to ride
Yeah.
these like mine carts around the tracks on the fire temple
Nobody
here.
did
No
that.
one did. Like almost no one did that.
Nobody.
Like because you didn't force me to do that. Sometimes telling the player a set of rules and holding them to that makes for a better experience. And I think that is like the best way to put it. That these older dungeons had that, and these two games did not have that. Especially Tears of the Kingdom really failed at doing that. And I like honestly like nothing in either game comes like even close to some of like the middle level dungeons of the older ones, let alone like something like I mean everyone knows like Twilight Princess and Snow Peak Ruins. Like to me that's like one of my like favorite dungeons because it doesn't feel like a dungeon. You're in this like old like mansion on a snowy
Mhm.
mountain that you go down like a giant hill snowboarding to get there. Like it's the whole presentation, the build up
It
to
felt
getting there.
integrated into the
Yeah.
world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. It like felt so good to do that, and I really missed that. And
Yeah.
even like I'll give it credit, Skyward Swords dungeons, like Ancient Cistern, like such a
Yeah.
like
It's
and
memorable. It's so memorable. You're
yes,
not gonna remember the Varuda in Breath of the Wild as much.
yeah, the divine beasts were. I understand like they were trying to focus on the new stuff and getting it right. I always will give them the benefit of the doubt, and I
Of
do
course.
applaud them for taking it. But I do feel like for me, the next entry, it's like it's time. You need to figure this out. Either with your new direction, make a compelling dungeon using your new freedom and creativity, or you need to like go back to the old way and give us like something because even like theme, yes, they had music that built up in the new Tears of the Kingdom dungeons. That was a nice touch. The bosses were themed at least, but man, they felt like pretty like low tier, but low on the totem pole for theming and atmosphere because you mentioned like the fire in forest temples just from Ocarina of Time, like that music in like the
The
forest
music
temple. It's
was
like you
so
can't get out of your
good.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it is pale in comparison, and it's just such a weak point. And that's if they can't. So if the point to wrap this all up for me is if they can't do that going forward in the new games, and they have to keep coming up with new ingenious ideas for like new types of dungeons. This is why I want more of a damn demand from me to bring back older Zelda styles because I want those dungeons again. I want more of those
Best of
dungeons.
both worlds. Give us
hmm
both. I don't
Exactly.
care if it's greedy.
Yeah.
There's so many types of Zelda fans now.
Exactly. And yeah, I feel like you should try and cater to both because while I don't think any older Zelda is going to break like 20, 25 million, 30 million copies sold like these new ones are, I still think it's possible for them to go like, in the 5 to 10 million range. Like obviously Ocarina was their previous best selling and Twilight Princess, they were two of their best selling ones and all their combined sales, they got up there like around like, 10ish million or maybe a little bit more. I don't not don't didn't know we were going to talk about this. Didn't have the numbers in front of me, but like I know like Ocarina was original OG Ocarina was like 7 point something, and I think combined Twilight Princess is definitely up there as well. But
I think Twilight
imagine,
Princess was the best selling before Breath of the Wild.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, I think something that's like hype at least and exciting and it has like passes like the eye test for an old Zelda has that chance to like maybe hit those numbers even something that's bigger who knows like heck like an Ocarina of Time full-blown remake could shatter numbers. I mean it doesn't have to literally
Or
be
reimagining,
yeah
make it like a Final Fantasy VII type of thing.
oh man I'd have so
Is
much
that too
fun
much to ask
if they
for? That's too ambitious?
if they could just screw around with like, oh, remember when Link pulled the Master Sword and time traveled, and we said there were like multiple endings, all that stuff. Well, guess what? Like he also created
Oh.
multiple universes and stuff. So like this version takes place here, and there's still the original version. I'm like, oh my god, yes, just go all in and screw with fans. I would like be,
Yeah.
would be beautiful. But yes, I do think this is why people clamor so much, why they shout so loudly for an older style of Zelda game, because specifically the dungeon design, the dungeon puzzles are just not there. And if they can't do that within the new structure of Zelda games, they should concede and give us something that's more in the old style. I would very much like to see that.
Agreed.
Um, yeah, you kind of answered the other question I was gonna ask about, like, did Tears of the Kingdom deliver satisfying dungeons? That was like the last thing I saw people asking about.
Almost.
Yeah, yeah. Was there anything like different with a dungeon, like an idea we didn't go over that you would like to see them try? If not, that's cool. I really don't have any. I have like one more idea I didn't like share, but if you've got one, just because like maybe that,
Um,
yeah, if there's something different you'd even like to see them do, maybe not even old or new, just like something in a different game you liked about like a dungeon like environment, maybe.
I'm not sure about dungeons, but I also want them to do something else with instruments. That has
Oh
always been like a
yes,
big
good, very
part of
good.
Zelda
Yeah,
games, and like it's always been a little bit different. Like one game had an ocarina, one game had the baton for changing the wind. Um, even Skyward Sword had the harp. Bringing back some kind of gameplay element with that in a new way. I think I miss that aspect of it. It's like
yeah,
not even like wishing they would do like the old things again, but like the old elements in new ways again.
yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
would love to see them bring back some kind of like musical instrument and do something special with it. And yeah, that was like such a like since the first game we've had musical instrument that like played like a key factor. You had like the recorder warping you around. Okay, I get Zelda 2, I guess it was just an item to move an obstacle. So it was probably more in the style of like the newer ones, but came right back in A Link to the Past, with the ocarina and having a bird or duck, whatever it was, carry you around. I mean, something goofy like that. Would love to see something like
Yeah.
that come back. But yeah, like remember like when they did in the DS ones, like, oh god, the Spirit Tracks flute. Did you
Yeah, they found
did you like
different ways
that?
and they use the different mechanics to do it. Like they're all different.
Yeah.
We don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I would like to see them return to that theme. Yeah, is there anything they haven't like that in the newer Zeldas that hasn't been from the older Zeldas that hasn't been incorporated into the newer Zeldas? I know you mentioned like Triforce Heroes. I had like all the different like outfits. We haven't like really seen them. I know they have
Yeah.
costumes in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have functionality, so like that kind of like lived on a
Yeah,
little
I think
bit.
that the way that they did that was fine. Like I'm not the kind of person that needs Link to be wearing, his green tunic all of the time. I think the way that they were able to tie abilities, with the different outfits that he could find, that was a good way to do it.
All right, I have one last question for you. If there was one of the older games to remake, remaster, whatever you want to do to it, which one would it be? Which is the one you most want to see be
Ooh.
updated of the ones that have not? Well, let's just say Link's Awakening is the only one. Like HD treatments, you can even say like remake those. Any of them, any of them. I don't care if they've had even Link's Awakening. If you want to see them do something different with it, maybe they didn't do it the way you wanted it. What do you want?
Ugh, I don't know if this is too stereotypical of an answer, but I do think that Ocarina of Time needs something else. It
Okay.
needs a little bit more love, a little bit more than just what the 3DS remake did. Um, I think that is a great game that, has very outdated mechanics. It is very hard for a lot of people who didn't maybe grow up with the N64 to go back and play that game. And I think there is a lot there that, like, if they really just did like a full remake, just from scratch, like remake it in like a modern type of way, I think that would be really, really awesome.
I'm very happy with hearing that. Like, I would love. I mean, I feel like it's like kind of like a crime that. Not really. It's a shame. It's a shame that Ocarina, like this, one of the most revered games, and all these other revered games around it that are from the past have been getting these like nice remakes, very good remasters, but mostly remakes. It's like, dang, like Resident Evil
I'm
4,
also just
like
a very simple person
7.
and will take Wind Waker HD, like just to be able to play it on
Okay,
like on a
that's
wood
good.
screen. Like that was a great remake or remaster.
I'll take any of those, honestly, just brought forward to Switch. Just especially the
Yeah.
more specifically the handheld ones though, mostly, and Wii U ones, just to get them off those two systems, please.
Yeah.
I would say everyone expects like Ocarina of Time, like for me to say, but also say I saw you chat. I saw you keep bringing up Zelda 2, and this is not Zelda 2. It needs to be remade like a Soulsborne. Don't make it just a simple side scrolling. It is. Everyone complains how brutally punishing it is, how cryptic it is, all this, all the it's like more action. And you know what? It could have been the Souls game of its time. It was the first 2D Souls like, and now it can have its chance to shine. Team up with From Software, make that Zelda, and call it just call it the Adventure of Link. Don't call it Zelda 2. Just call it the Adventure of Link. And it's like you're just dropped in a world, and like good luck. Zelda, you want brutally hard punishing Zelda? There you go. You got it. There you
It
go.
is really like a black sheep of the franchise, and I don't think they need to shy away from that. I think they could embrace it.
Yeah, I think they can do a lot of creative things with it. So I just
Totally.
like in particular Zelda 2 is so neglected. Obviously it's been put on other platforms. It's OG version, but I would like to see it maybe get some kind of like update.
Fresh coat of paint.
Yeah, it'd
Yeah.
be really nice to see them do that with it. But that's really gonna do it for this episode. I had the one thing I was thinking of, like we might do like a dungeon ranking thing when I got to dungeons, but like we already are like over an hour, and I didn't really think it was gonna fit with the flow. I had like one last note, like fun little mini like game thing to like that was like it didn't like work out. So I kind of have a little bit of a rundown, and like as we go through things, I'm like, it doesn't feel like it's gonna work out. We'll just like move on. I think we've reached a nice kind of natural conclusion here. So I want to thank you for joining me on this first episode of the still nameless Damiani show, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for thinking of me for this. You know that I will talk about Zelda any day. You'll just have to invite me back so that we can rank the dungeons another time.
Yes, we could just make that a whole episode. We could just do that for an absolute episode because our community hate top tens. They hate us ranking stuff. So there's nothing I love more than like upsetting our community and causing controversy. But no, they adore it. In fact, we have on our Discord for our community, they every month they do like a top 10 list. And on one of the podcast episodes, we unveil what they picked for their top 10. What are you ranking now, chat? I forgot. It's like places to gather, like taverns or something. What is this month's
Ooh,
one for January
that's
that we're going to
creative.
be revealing? Like, yeah, they've done some pretty good ones in the past, and it's always fun. Oh, top 10 restaurants, bars, eating and drinking establishments. This
Ah,
Wednesday, top eating and drinking establishments. That's what it is.
interesting.
That's
I like that because it makes you think of like,
yeah,
all the different games that might have something like that.
yeah, for sure. I know we could have talked a little bit more and stuff, but like again, I would like to keep these a little bit tighter and concise. And this felt pretty good. Before I let you go and we wrap up here, where can our listeners, our viewers, follow you if they want to check out more of your work?
Yes, so if you didn't believe that I was a Zelda fan after this hour of talking about it, my username is Forestminish, like the Minish Cap, on Twitter, Twitch, most places on the internet. So follow me there. You can see me talk about video games. Talk to me about video games. I like them.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, chat, for being engaging with us and giving them some of your ideas. Obviously, give some feedback. On Patreon, on the Discord, wherever we generally look at our feedback. You can just like tweet at me on social media if you want. I don't call it X, I call it Twitter. I guess social media is the way around it, but whatever. Just let me know your thoughts, and we can go from there. Otherwise, that's it. Pretty sure my mom has been texting me for the last 10 minutes because I'm supposed to come over. She's like, before I started recording, she's like, are you coming over? Your nephew's over here and they want to see you. And I'm like, I'm shooting a show. Like, she didn't let me know this was happening at all. And I'm like, you can't do like last minute stuff like this. I was like, you knew this was
Go
happening.
call your
You should
mom.
have done this. But now I'm like, I said I'd be done at 1. It's like 1:07. She's like,
Ah.
the boys, where are you, Michael? Come on over. They're like, I can't handle them. They're too crazy. No, nothing like that. They're both sweet. So thank you again, everyone. And until next time, see you later. Bye-bye.